Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and our guests this evening are Andrew DeFranza and Kristin Carlson. I keep wanting to call you Conley for some reason or other, get that locked in my brain. We've had a couple of shows talking about affordable housing, and we had Jason Silva talking about his experience growing up in the housing situation here in Beverly, and you came on and talked about some of the other situations before. And what prompted this particular show is Kristin and Andrew gave me a tour of the facility that you just rehabbed over in Salem. Oh. And I guess that's all finished by now and people have moved in?
The first building. It's a two-building project.
Yeah,
but
then the second half of this thing is you're going to go back and rehab the second building. Mm-hmm. And I remember when we were going through it, you were talking about there's a 250 square foot or some number like that. Mm-hmm. What was that about? I keep forgetting.
So when you're developing a certain set of units, there are different requirements depending on what the zoning is or what the planning board requires.
Yeah.
In this case, the zoning board wanted to be sure that it was single occupancy, meaning only one individual.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that was through the health code. So if you have a unit that's 250 square feet or under, it's only allowed to have one person per unit. So
that's the gimmick that the board uses to control the occupancy.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the intent of it or not, but that's how we used it there. But it is a health code issue, yeah. not a city issue.
The other thing you mentioned was that because Salem had done a lot of work or contributed something to this project, they could set a requirement that 70% of the residents were Salem residents.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and it's actually even a little more interesting than how you had just described it. The mayors of Salem and Peabody and Beverly, so Mayor Driscoll, Mayor Betancourt, Mayor Cahill, created an agreement, a memorandum of understanding, whereby all of them agreed that they were going to create a certain amount of housing units over a period of time, and with a focus on housing for homeless people and homeless families. And so as a part of that, they agreed that they were going to try to give each other what we would call a mutual local preference. So there's a law at the state level, regulation, that you can offer 70% local preference, which means that when you initially lease up the building and have your waiting list, you can essentially offer 7 out of 10 to people who are from that municipality or sometimes work there. Mm-hmm. The state has to approve this, but that's what's allowable. So in our case, it was approved that Salem and Beverly and Peabody could have a local preference for each other. So this project in Salem is the first project that grew out of that soil, the homeless task force that was started by Mayor Cahill. Yeah. And so now when that building was leased up, there were 91 people on the waiting list and another handful that got in. Essentially, a bunch of the people who were able to get access were from, in this case, Beverly and Salem, because of that local preference.
So the local preference is not just Salem only; it's Salem, Beverly, and Peabody.
In this particular case, which is unique. I haven't heard of that ever happening before.
Oh, okay.
So,
and I guess the other question is, this building was, I guess, geared for homeless people.
It is formerly homeless.
How do you establish a residency for homeless people?
Yeah, often.
So how do you pick them that way?
Yeah, so there's a way that they get picked and a way that it gets established. So the establishment is generally going to be made by an institution where they are living means that they're homeless. So one of the homeless shelters. So a lot of folks are going to be people who have been homeless at Lifebridge in Salem or at River House in Beverly.
Oh, okay.
And those folks are homeless. They're living in a transitional setting, and they're eagerly trying to find a way to regain their independence. This is a perfect situation for them. Mm-hmm. If it was somebody who was homeless, let's say in a place not meant for human habitation, like living outside or in a tent or in a car, you're usually going to get a referral from a nonprofit organization that knows that, or maybe the police, or somebody has to sign off and say, this person is homeless.
He's been living behind this dumpster for 2 months, so therefore he's a good candidate.
Right, but a lot of people are coming from the shelters, which is really good news.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, Kristin, you're an architect. Did you design these things?
No. No, I'm an architect, but in my capacity at Harbor Light, I work as a project manager. So basically working with Andrew to coordinate coordinate the architects, the contractors, all the various consultants and team players that are in the job. There's a lot of funding sources that go into projects like these.
Yeah.
So coordinating all of them. But I got to work with the architect, which was great. So I was the one telling them, you got to
Put your
change
line
it.
here.
It costs too much money. So I was on the
Okay.
other side of the table.
Yeah.
Right. And the architect is local, so Samasco and Burbridge is the architect.
Oh, yeah. They do just about everything. They did the Y. And,
Yeah, they're great.
yeah. And the reason I'm kind of interested in the architecture, way back when I was fascinated with Frank Lloyd Wright. And my first year in graduate school, the Dean of Architecture was Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. So I got to see Crown Hall and a few other buildings. I was a math major at the time, so it was the closest I got. But one of the things that always bothered me about it, thinking about being an architect, 5 years to get your license was a stumbling block when I was in high school. And the other one was, how am I going to convince some young couple to spend their life savings on my first experiment? So I guess you found a way around that is project management. And the other thing that surprised me is I was standing at the Y one day, and this guy walks up to me and says, "You don't remember me, do you?" No. Turns out I had him when he was in the 5th grade at St. Mary's when I was teaching there, and he went through UMass Lowell, started as a civil engineer, and became a project manager. He took the project manager course. So did you get into something like that, or just straight architecture degree and then?
And yeah, so I studied architecture undergrad at Syracuse and
Okay.
got my degree there. And like you said, it was 5 years of school,
Yeah.
then multiple years of internship, then a whole series of exams. So
Yeah.
it is quite a process. And I practiced for a while doing that. I also did some volunteering at the time for Habitat for Humanity through the AmeriCorps program. So I was always sort of interested in housing. I decided to go back to grad school, and I studied city planning and real estate development and finance, which was a dual degree at MIT. And after that, did a couple of different things, but found that I really like being on the development side. And you're kind of seeing a lot of the aspects
Like
that make the
pulling the
projects
strings.
come together. Yeah, and it's very, very collaborative. You're sort of assembling a big group to try to make these things happen.
Yeah.
So it's that aspect of it is really fun, really exciting. And there's still, I'm still connected to the bricks and mortar, which I love. And I love when projects are under construction. I love going out to the job meetings and seeing
Yeah.
what's going on and working with the contractor and the architect. So
Yeah.
it's just sort of a different perspective. But I did go back to school for that.
One of the things we have between the senior center and the school is a breakfast with seniors. And we usually get into the discussion with the seniors of when I was going to school, the only time you'd see a female was maybe in freshman chemistry, but never again in a technical course. And the world has changed dramatically since then. And there only were 3 degrees for females back then. You could be a teacher, you could be a nurse, or you could be home ec. And that was it. But interesting that you got a different program.
That was certainly the case for my mom would say the same thing to me
Yeah.
when I was young, and that was but how many more choices I had, and I'm fortunate to come from a line of very very strong and determined women.
Yeah.
So.
That's the other thing too. We can get into that. Now, this project you did in Salem, how close is that to what you're going to do in the YMCA in Beverly? A similar project or different or what?
Yeah, it's a little different in that, the Y has a long history of being where they are, so there's already 45 units there.
Yeah.
And so we're going to add another 24 units to that site. So the Y project is much larger. It's much more technically complex, I think it'd be fair to say. The nature of that historic building is significant. We're going to need a lot of steel. We're adding a floor, so it's got some really what we would think of as exciting construction elements. In terms of operations, though, which is probably what you're asking about, George, it's going to be very similar in that the units are a similar type. So small units,
Single occupancy?
kitchenette, bathroom, supportive services on site to help facilitate and support people's ongoing independence and success. Some set aside for homeless individuals. So there will be some similar elements to the way the project is operated, but it's a different physical project.
These facilities, are they all male or mixed male and female? Or
They're mixed.
they're mixed? Okay. Yeah, because that's one of the things I guess I get surprised about is how many women you see wandering around town that
Yeah.
they don't look like they have a permanent home.
Yeah.
And just don't want to see something that
Yep.
locks them out of it because you got some sort of limitation.
Yep. No limitation either in Salem or in Beverly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with this facility at the Y, you mentioned there's other kinds of, besides homeless that are in there. What are the other groups that you can service in a facility like that?
Yeah, we're trying to create a partnership, and it's important for me to note that the Cabot Y project is the YMCA's project, and we're a helper to them. We're essentially a consultant to them. So I would want to make sure to respect that and note that for your audience. One of the things we're trying to do is set up a partnership with the Y and Northeast Arc, so that there would be a DDS.
Translate, Dee.
Adults with developmental disabilities.
Yeah.
Tier to the project, so folks that had maybe autism or some other particular challenge,
Yeah.
that there would be a set-aside bunch of units for them. I think we landed at 10.
Yeah.
So there'd be one set aside for formerly homeless individuals and one for folks with some disabilities, and services on site for both of those groups and their particular needs.
Yeah, I remember when you appeared before the Parking and Traffic Commission, we got into the discussion of maintaining spaces behind the building for vans that were bringing in people,
Right.
because that was the ramp access to the building.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, we're also increasing the number of fully accessible units as
Yeah.
part of the project.
ADA
So
units,
The
right.
ADA units that will be fully accessible for someone in a wheelchair.
So besides wheelchair access, what other problems do you have to work out?
Well, like as Andrew said, there's the structural issue of adding another floor onto an existing historic brick building.
Yeah.
That's going to require a very delicate touch to get that done, but it's doable. We're adding an elevator to the building that's going to service the residential floors. Right now, the existing elevators is pretty small. It's much older, so it's hard for people. If someone needs to come out, for example, on a stretcher, it's really hard for someone. It's
Can you fit a
tricky.
wheelchair on the existing one?
You can fit a wheelchair in the existing
But a
one,
stretcher won't make it.
but the stretcher
gurney's
is
too big.
yeah. You can't keep it flat
Yeah.
in the elevator. So the new elevator will be large enough to accommodate that. So it'll be much better from sort of services, life safety point of view.
Yeah. What else do you have to build into a facility? I have no idea what do you mean when you say, okay, we're going to make this accessible for some category?
Yeah, describe it in some detail.
Yeah, sure. So, for example, for a mobility accessible unit, so for a unit that someone in a wheelchair could live in, would be larger door openings that are easy to get through, making sure you have turn radiuses, things at a level that people are able to reach and grab.
Yeah.
So everything in the bathroom, everything in the kitchen needs to be designed in such a way that somebody can easily access them from a seated position or and have a little more maneuvering space.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And then we'll also be adding some common spaces, which are really important. The units are fairly small, so think of a small studio apartment. So having a common space where there might be an opportunity for, say, if people want to get together and have a meal, or say there's a class or a meeting or just a place
Yeah.
outside of your apartment to go hang out and talk to people. So
Yeah.
that's going to be an important component of it
So
too.
you're still limited to this 250 square feet more?
Not necessarily in this,
No, it's not
in
a
this
limit here.
case, but it will be. It's very likely that that's about the
Yeah.
size unit you're
So
going to end
that's
up
a
with.
room 12 by 12, plus a little space, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe 13 by 13, yeah.
So
It's
the-
pretty compact.
Yeah, pretty.
it
yeah,
really
pretty
does
thin.
require very clever design to make sure that that there's a lot more to it than just that limitation.
Yeah, and
Right,
it's-
so you want to build in storage wherever
Right.
you can.
High cabinets.
yeah.
Storage under the bed, things
Yeah.
like that, just to maximize the space that you have.
Right.
So after you finish this little exercise, what's your next project?
Well, we're very excited about, at least in Beverly, we're excited about the 40R overlay at the corner of Sawyer and Tozier that was passed late last year.
Yeah.
So that will be a 75-unit project for families with a set aside for homeless families. It's in a 40R district, so the city gets incentive payments and also access to 40S payments, which is essentially a school reimbursement, which is very unique. First one that will be done in Beverly, first one in the area that I'm aware of. So that's excellent. So we are in the design phase of that. Samasco and Burbridge is the architect again. Kristin will be working with. We've started to go through some financing for that, and we'll submit a financing package to the state later this year. We are, sooner than that, we're working on a small project behind the post office on Hardy Street. It's a 6-unit family rental project that's been permitted and approved. The Housing Trust in Beverly has funded it. The Community Preservation Committee has recommended funding for it. And we're through the first of 2 phases at the state. So Kristin will be working on an application that's due, I think, May 14th. And if we're fortunate to get funded, we'll be breaking ground later this year on that.
Yeah.
We got a few others in the works, but
So you're busy.
we're busy.
Yeah.
Busy.
One of the things that I guess has bothered me, and I guess we mentioned this the last time we talked, is we got a banner up there that's going to say housing they can afford. And this discontinuity, I guess we started it with Jason Silva, that there is affordable housing by definition, which I think for Beverly is $1,800 a month, or some number like that for rental. And then there's housing that people can afford.
Right.
And I'm developing a feeling that the city of Beverly is becoming like a resort, that if you live here, you have to work someplace else to afford to do that. And if you work here and you're part of the vibrant community or the service industry that makes it a vibrant community, you got to live someplace else. And this disconnect, I've seen it written up in a lot of different places. We're not unique in that.
No.
But I went through some numbers that in my neighborhood just took the assessed value of my property. And I said, okay, if it was an acre, it's $1 million for an acre. And it's an R10 zone. And that means you can get at most 4 houses on an R10 on an acre. So there you're starting with a $250,000 bill before you have 1 stick of wood up.
You got it, George.
You haven't even hired the architect yet.
Yes. Or you can buy a tent right out of it. Yeah. But this is, I think, a fundamental problem, that we've got a situation with the zoning that something's got to change in order to make it possible. And invariably, with the cost of land being that it is, and it's not going to reduce the cost of land, you're going to have to get into multi-story buildings. So then the next issue comes up of, how do we prevent one of those things turning into another Pruitt-Ego or, Cabrini Green, or even the one in Boston, the Columbia Point, that the first 2, they got torn down in, 1976. And they were, appearance-wise, gorgeous-looking places. And they just disintegrated, and they couldn't be maintained. And the only thing that saved Columbia Point was the government got out of it, and they went to a private developer to maintain and control it. So I can see a lot of people would have, oh, you're not going to put one of those in my backyard. And
we've heard that before.
Yes, I imagine. So how do you convince somebody, or what can you tell somebody that we got a way around it? We can prevent this from happening, or we know how to do this.
Right. Now, first, I smile a lot. That's my first tactic. But generally, I think we deal with a few different issues. One is we're very present, meaning we're around, we're local. And so we want to make the point that we've been here a long time, we're going to be here a long time, and people know the body of work, and they know the humans, they know the relationships. That tends to do a lot, because people start to say, okay, we know what you've done. I know, my mother lived at Turtle Creek, or I knew somebody who lived at Harbor Lighthouse, and so people start to feel familiarity. They feel some sense of continuity relationally. And people are more comfortable, largely because I think they have confidence and they trust the track record and the people that are involved. And that's a big deal. It's one of the reasons why we would always advocate for local work in this regard. As it relates to how things get done and how they're going to be in the future, part of the issue there is the way, you mentioned a couple of public housing projects, the ones that you referenced. Some of the way those got financed, and particularly the way they were funded over time. right? There was they made very large structures that had a high concentration of folks with very limited means. And then essentially, as a matter of public policy, we cut off the spigot. Some of that is related to race. If any of your viewers are interested in the new workout called The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, I would highly recommend, around how public housing was set up and discrimination based on race and class.
Yeah, there's also a movie, The Pruitt Myth, that goes into the same thing. And
Yeah. So
there were some problems, but
Right.
these are the problems that you have to
Right.
overcome in order to maintain a viable situation.
So the operating system, right? Exactly to your point, George. It can't just be about day one. Right? Anybody can get something built. It has to be about 5 years out, 10 years out, 20 years out. So the financing for the deal and the operating support has to be stable, meaning that you can't set up a building like we had done in these cases and then essentially cut off the operating resources and expect it to perform over time, because buildings are, they're natural creations, and they need recapitalization, and they have failures. And if they
you got maintenance that you got to make.
Yeah, you got to be able to.
So if you don't set that up
the
from
elevator.
if you don't set up the maintenance from the beginning to be successful, you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
But a lot of time when we hear the Cabrini Green reference or others, it's because somebody is they're nervous about something that is different than the thing at hand. And sometimes it's a dog whistle. It's a racial issue.
It's a real situation that happened more than once.
Of course.
And I was living in Chicago in 1960, 61.
Yeah.
And it was an exciting time if you're living on the south side of Chicago.
I bet.
And there were problems that they've got to be faced, and you've got to solve them.
Yeah.
You just can't walk away from them and say, I feel good about that.
Right.
That's another one of my projects, these feel-good laws that are showing up over the place.
I like to feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to be some basis for feeling good instead of your imagination.
Sure. But if you If you
Share one with me too. Yeah. But this issue, I guess, is going to be with us for a while, because I know you're having problems in Hamilton.
Significant
It's
problems.
a challenge.
Right.
And we went one better in Beverly. It used to be not in my backyard. Now it's not on your front lawn either.
Right. How about the solar array?
The solar array.
Yeah.
And so this is what I get
Yeah.
wound up about with this. Feel good about having a solar array, except don't put it here, don't put it there.
Well,
Put a windmill,
Part of the land cost issues that you referenced, George, is because we have a regional symbiosis, right? We treat housing costs and land costs as if somehow each border of each municipality is distinct. It would be as if we treated air as it was distinct. It doesn't work that way. And when the surrounding communities constrict the supply of land, the cost of land everywhere, to your point.
Well, it's the zoning,
It's the zoning.
It's got to be an R10, it's got to be an R20.
Exactly. And if our neighboring communities are not participating, it makes it harder for us here as well.
The only solution you get is you got to build up.
Right.
I mean, I think density is something that comes up too in these discussions. If you're in a neighborhood with a lot of single-family homes, the idea of an apartment building can be like, well, what is that going to look? Understandably, what is that going to look like? And getting to know. You may have a picture in your mind of some 20-story tower, right, if you hear affordable housing. But getting to know, for example, some of our other projects is really helpful. Like, I didn't know that was you guys, or that's, just getting a different idea or picture in your head of what it can look like and what it's going to feel like if it is next door to you.
There has been some criticism of the architectural design, because the idea is you build essentially a rectangular building with cladding on it and build it as high as you can. And that makes a very dense facility. You can take care of a lot of people that way, but you've got to get used to the aesthetic. And one of the things about the aesthetic that bothers me is everybody gets nervous and jerky about putting a wind turbine in their backyard. Oh, that big ugly thing. But yet you go down to the Cape, and just about every town has an old windmill from way back when. And said, this is a tourist attraction. I guess if they live long enough, they'll become tourist attractions.
That's
There's a place, funny one, there's a place down in South Carolina that they would sell bottles of wind turbine air. They scoop it up next to the wind turbine and bottle it. So
That's a good business.
but it's an idea.
Sure, we should try that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess you got some projects coming in town.
Yeah.
You got some zoning issues that have got to be addressed, and I don't see anybody working on them. That's one of the things that bothers me. That, yeah, we can sit
Right.
here and talk about, yeah, you got to do something about an R10, or you got to set aside certain areas that can be something other than.
Right.
And there's this whole big area up on 128,
Yep.
Cherry Hill,
Yep.
Folly Hill. Cherry Hill is predominantly commercial. Okay, fine. Across the street from there, across 128, Folly Hill, that's still up for grabs.
Right.
And people are fighting that because, oh, it's going to raise hell with the traffic. Well, okay, if it's going to cause traffic problems, design around it. Put an access onto 128 so you can get in and out without having to go through the neighborhood. And I don't see the next step in these things. Is this something you guys can get into, or we're all going to whistle in the dark?
Yeah, I mean, I think one good piece of information is that Beverly really does quite well. I mean, we're around in a lot of communities, and Beverly is thoughtful and eager and trying, and we're in some places where people just don't want to talk about anything, and some of this is at the state level. So there are active pieces of legislation right now, the Great Neighborhoods Bill and the governor's housing incentive program, that are both competing in this current legislative session, that would include different sorts of zoning support around the state. So we're certainly watching those. We really like the Great Neighborhoods Bill and are supportive of that. I don't know what you think about the design side on the access.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you build something new, that's always going to be a question. But there are some technical solutions to things like that. But I mean, it's a valid question, but you can't let that stop you from ever building anything.
Yeah.
I think our bigger challenge is the regional one, I guess is the point that I'm making.
We're running out of time, as you can imagine. So the one last question I'd like to get in. When some contractor builds a building and is required to put in 10%, they have an option of putting money into a pot in lieu of actually building a affordable housing in there. Where has any of this money ever been spent?
So one clarification, then, and I answer the question. So they can put the money in the pot if it's an ownership deal. They can't do that for rental, and that's a Beverly specific ordinance. So each municipality has to decide if they want to do that ordinance. In our case, we're using that money, which is sitting with the Housing Trust. Some of that money is going to go to our new Hardy Street project. So $190,000, I think, has been recommended to that. And to the Cabot Y project, another $200,000 has been recommended from the trust. I think it was $200,000. So those are the first two that I'm aware of that are going to use some of that payment money.
So the money is actually getting used.
Correct.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And a lot more to talk about. Hope to have you back and we do some more.
Sure. Thanks for having us,
Thank
George.
Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you next time.
Take care.